The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I see that we have some of us in the meeting today. Good afternoon. My name is Vishaka Shivaraman. I'm an MPO staff, and today we will be going over our Plan City Transit stakeholder meeting. This is May 21st and 3 p.m. So we have this meeting, which is part 2 of kind of the first meeting we had was in February, and today we are having the second part of the meeting where we will be going over some of the previous things we discussed at the last meeting, and then from there we will be looking at some of the alternatives based on the discussion and the feedback what we received last month. So with me, I have my project management team that includes Nicole McCleary from HART. I have Sarah from the MPO staff, and I have Alana who's working with me on this project. So with this, I hope everyone can hear loud and clear. I just wanted to really quick touch base with upon the meeting webinar helpful hints, which you can see screen down here. In case this is your first experience, just wanted to let you know that there is an audio button where you can, if you can choose that to talk. There is a raise hand. That's an option for you to talk. You are all in listen only mode. So if you want to have, we have someone who's managing the chat. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we will be given an opportunity to ask a question. You can also chat with the chat box, as you can see on the screen. You can ask us any question at any time, and we will be going over this meeting today. We will have different sections. The first section will cover the introduction. Then the second section will cover the previous transit studies. We'll just go through the recap of the previous meeting. And then the third section will look into the future and the alternatives, as I mentioned before. With this, I hand it over to Alana. If you can take over from here, Alana, please go ahead and get started.
Sure. Thank you, Vishaka. And I'm going to now pull up the presentation. So I'll just jump right into things. Thanks for joining us today. I think Vishaka went over this pretty well, but we are going to have opportunities for questions and further discussion at certain points. So we'll have a slide with this little person icon pop up, and we'll open up the floor. So we just ask that you type your questions into the chat box if you have them, which I will point out is over here. This is the GoToWebinar window. So there's this little chat portion, and in this box you can type your message, and like Vishaka said, we'll have someone keeping track of them, so when we do get to those question and discussion slides, you'll have an opportunity to share them. So jumping into things, just wanted to give some background for those who might not be familiar with Plant City. I know we have a lot of Plant City folks on the call, but there might be others who aren't as familiar with it. So it's a city of about 40,000 residents. It's on the border between Hillsborough County and Polk County, and it is one of the fastest growing areas of Hillsborough County by percent of population. So the study area that we looked at includes all of Plant City, but also some of the unincorporated areas surrounding it. And there was previous transit service here. There's currently, today, there is no public transit service available in Plant City, but there was previous transit service available in the early 2000s and early 2010s. So there was a Strawberry connector, and this was an inner city route that had, at one time, 4 routes that kind of operated in a clover leaf pattern. You can see there's the pink and the purple and green and blue lines, and so these kind of covered the majority of the area of Plant City. And then there was also the East County Express, which was operated by HART. And so that was more of a commuter service, park and ride. So it's this orange line that comes off of I-4. It picked up people off of the Notasasa Road and then brought them into downtown Tampa. Both of those transit service options were unfortunately cut due to mostly the recession and budget cuts that were needed. But the purpose of this study is to now explore what are some of the options that could be available, looking at what was previously available, looking at new options, considering, you know, things have changed, population is growing rapidly there. We'll evaluate those alternatives based on costs, potential ridership, and some other performance measures. And then through your help in weighing the options, provide some recommendations that we think should go forward. And just to give you an overview of our study schedule, so we have, this is our second of 2 stakeholder focus group meetings. We had our first back in February. This one, we again are presenting some of the initial alternatives we came up with. And after this, we'll also have potentially in person, a public open house, potentially online. And at that, we will share the results. I apologize for background noise. We will share the results of the the alternatives that we're proposing and incorporating the feedback we hear from you guys today. So I think Vishaka touched on this, but just again, we'll, for today's meeting, we're going to summarize what we heard from that February focus group meeting, share some high-level findings that we got from the existing conditions and travel market report, present our initial thoughts on the route alternatives, and then open it up to some feedback from you guys. And then we'll also have an opportunity for you guys to share your thoughts and ideas and comments afterwards. We'll send a follow-up survey after this meeting, so you can share your preferences, share any other comments, thoughts, ideas that we need to be aware of. And so now I'm going to pause and let Vishaka just run through a list of the people, generally speaking, the agency level, who's in the room, quote unquote, today.
And Lana, we have one raised hand. Jay Hollenkamp has his hand raised, or at least did.
Okay.
Does he have a question still?
I think he probably needs to be unmuted.
Okay.
Which I cannot do.
He's ready.
Okay, Jay, if you have your question, you can go ahead.
He's unmuted, right?
Yeah, Jay, you are self-muted, so if you can unmute yourself, then you can ask your question.
It says sorry now in the question box. I'm not sure if he had a question.
Okay, maybe it was just
Sorry,
an accident.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I am so sorry. I didn't even mean to interrupt. I wasn't sure what the hand up button meant, and I hit it by accident. I really apologize.
No problem.
So if I hit it, is my hand up now or not? It's not clear from the.
No, it's not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead, Vishaka.
Yeah, Lana, I don't know if you noticed, we have Dr. Martin Clay, who had a request that everybody would like to know who's in the room. So I think I have a list printed out here based on the RSVPs I received. So I'm just going to be calling a roll call vote, if that's okay. I don't want to be taking too much time. Like I said before, we have the MPO, HART, and the consultant team with us. But other than that, I'm just going quickly over the attendee list. We have Chandra Frederick from Polk County. We have Jay Hollenkamp. We have Charles Palmy from Lakeland. We have Mary Ross from FDOT. We have Dr. Martin Clay from the Hillsborough College. Mike Carr from Plant City. We have Richard Lelyquist from Plant City. Rodney Wetzel from Citrus Connection. Kevin Smith from Hillsborough County. Laurie Marable from FDOT. Camila Di Loreto from Quality Counts. I have Dave Newell from FDOT District 7, Christopher Gleason, Jennifer Dandowski, and Stephen Hollenkamp. Please let me know if I missed out anyone. I'm just trying to, we have C.L. Townsend, Arlie Smeud, Christine Miller, and I'm trying to see if I missed out anyone. Karen Smith, I think I got it. Yes, that's the list of attendees I have as of now. We have over 18 attendees now. So just wanted to quickly give you that update. If anyone has a question, you may ask at this time. Thank you. Seeing none.
And if Vishaka missed anyone, you can also just type your name and who you're representing in the chat box.
Sure. I don't see any questions. Yeah.
So I'll move on then.
Thanks, Alana.
Yeah. So just to give a quick recap of our first focus group meeting with you guys. Again, that was back in February, a couple months ago, and we did a couple activities together. The purpose of that meeting was to start to get a sense of what are the important areas that we need to be focusing on for transit, what are some of the routes we need to be focusing on, what are some of the high-level things we should be aware of. And so we asked these 3 questions. What are the biggest benefits to implementing transit here? What are the biggest challenges to implementing transit? And then what is needed to make transit successful? And so we asked everyone to answer these questions. They wrote down their answers on an index card. And so we summarized all of them. And this is kind of the high-level overview of the comments that we heard back to the first question. So what are the biggest benefits to implementing transit? And the first one, we got a few comments on this saying that it helps lower income people access their daily needs and jobs, improve mobility for people with disabilities, greater access to destinations, both within Plant City and outside of Plant City, improving roadway safety through decreasing traffic was also noted a few times, supporting economic development in Plant City, and then also supporting healthy, active lifestyles by helping switch people from driving to walking to the transit stop or biking to the transit stop. And then we also asked what are the biggest challenges. So some of the thoughts that we got back were that, of course, funding availability to implement the new service would be a challenge. Operating costs to continue the service into the future, so talking about the sustainability of it, not just operating it for 1 or 2 years and then pulling it back again. Getting support from county and city leadership was said to be a challenge. Providing reliable service was also thought to be a challenge. The low density development pattern in Plant City was noted. There might not be high enough density to support the ridership needed to actually make transit viable. Overcoming perception of public transit was also noted. Switching people from driving to taking transit was noted as being a big challenge. And then also an overemphasis on coverage could be a challenge to implementing transit, emphasizing reaching everyone, which makes it a little less, a little longer travel times and less convenient routes. And then the last question, what's needed to make transit successful here? People noted reasonable travel times and consistent service, making sure the first last mile connections are safe and convenient, so how people get to and from the bus stops. It was recommended to implement transit in stages as a progression, so kind of taking baby steps to a bigger service. Managing expectations, so noting that not all people in all areas will have access, since that ties back to that challenge of coverage. Choosing the right nodes and connecting to the right hubs, keeping the cost low for the bus riders, outreach and education around a new service, so making people aware that there is a new service available, coordination at the agency level, and then generating community support and a transit champion to help get this implemented. And then we also did a few mapping activities. So we had one map that noted some of the general points of interest in Plant City. So like schools, grocery stores, theater, library, community centers. And on this map, we had the groups come around and note any additional areas or places that they thought we really should highlight as the key hubs that should be connected to, and then also noting the corridors that they felt transit should operate on. And so some of the main comments we got back were that grocery stores are a big thing that people need to be connected to. Also, South Florida Baptist Hospital, which is the largest employer in Plant City, was noted. There's a few hotels that have popped up. I think they're kind of on the periphery. They're also, I think, mostly near grocery stores as well, so those kind of go together. And then Strawberry Square were noted as kind of the big hubs that should be connected to. And then corridors that it should operate on: Reynolds Street, Baker Street, of course, going through downtown, South Collins Street, which also turns into Redmond Parkway, which is where majority of the shopping centers are located, and grocery is also there. And then also Park Road was noted as well. And then as far as the express route goes, there was a preference for an express bus with limited stops between Tampa, Plant City, and Lakeland. People felt it should generally serve Tampa and Lakeland commuters. There was definitely a sentiment that connecting through Brandon would not be supported. I think the previous service connected through Brandon, and people felt that it just took a long time and didn't think that it would be a viable choice here. And there were some suggestions to look at providing this service on US 92 and Baker Street, also SR 574, which is MLK, and then also I-4. And a couple park and ride locations were also noted. There's the stadium that's off of Park Road, which is where the XFL football team is currently practicing, but they also have a large parking area there. There's the downtown train station, which has a fairly large parking lot. And then there's also an FDOT property owned on the southwest corner of I-4 and Alexander Street that could be potential park and ride locations. And so at the focus group meeting, we had a second map that showed our communities of concern. And so communities of concern, for those who are not aware, are census block groups that measure more than one standard deviation above the county's median in 2 or more of the following characteristics: low income, disability, youth, elderly population, limited English proficiency, minorities, and carless households. So these are kind of the communities that we really want to focus on. They might be more transit dependent as well. And so we asked the meeting attendees to look at this map, see, first of all, did they feel like it captured the transit dependent populations? And then also noting where they really needed to be connected to. And so there's some overlaps here with these locations as the first map that I showed. So connecting to Walmart and groceries, Strawberry Square, the essential services that are available in downtown, healthcare, and then Plant City High School. And then the last map that we had people take a look at and respond to was a blank map, and we asked them to note where they thought or knew of employment growth and residential growth. And so there's a lot of dots on the map. The red dots represent the employment growth, and then blue dots represent residential growth. And so it's kind of dispersed all over the place, but I think we can start to see there's some corridors and areas where there's growth happening, like on Redmond Parkway, over on the border between Hillsborough County and Polk County. And so as far as residential growth goes, there was comments that some people felt more residential development was needed to support transit here, particularly on the Circulator, and recommended increasing infill development to add more density in the core of Plant City. It was also noted that maybe one solution is allowing the upper floors of downtown offices and commercial spaces to have residents. And then as far as employment growth goes, again, the biggest employers in Plant City are the South Florida Baptist Hospital, which is over on the western area of Plant City, and then HCC College, which is up more closer to I-4, just east of Collins Street, northeast of Collins Street. And then it was also noted there's a large area of industrial, warehouse, and distribution services that are popping up in the southeast portion of our study area. And it was also noted a need for expanded roadway infrastructure to accommodate that growth. So from all of the feedback that we heard through that meeting and through other meetings that we'd had with Plant City staff, we came up with some initial transit alternative goals that we're using for this study, just to kind of weigh our options when we get to presenting the alternatives. So number one goal was implementing useful and reliable service for people who need it the most, and those would be the communities of concern and persons with disabilities. The second goal is to use transit to incentivize development in downtown Plant City, and then connect Plant City to Tampa and Lakeland, Polk County with transit. And so now I'm going to pause and open it up to see if there's any questions or comments, feedback at this point.
There's a question from Jay Holenkamp. It says, was downtown not indicated for employment growth?
I believe it was. I think it was kind of if there wasn't a dot there, I think it was just kind of an assumed that there would be growth in downtown. Go back. Yeah, there's some dots for residential growth. And there's a note of the Midtown development we know that is occurring. Are there any other questions or feedback? Okay, I'll move on. So we did an existing conditions and travel market report, which you can find on the website, and we'll have a link at the end of this presentation, so you can do some light reading after this. But just to go over some of the high-level findings of this that help kind of inform the alternatives that we'll share, just want to go over a few things. And this was actually shared at our first focus group meeting, but just as kind of a refresher and for the people who weren't there, we looked at the US Census Bureau's on the map tool. And so this shows you, it looks at employment data. And so they have a couple analyses that you can do. One is inflow and outflow of employees and workers. And so in Plant City, the actual city itself, there are a total of 17,477 primary jobs. And so primary jobs are the one job, like that is the highest paying job for the person. So if someone has 2 jobs, we're not double counting that person. And so of that 17,000, about 13,700 live in Plant City but work outside of it. And then there's about 16,000 who live outside of Plant City but work in Plant City. And then for those who live and work in Plant City, it's about 2,400, almost 2,500 people. So when we're looking at where Plant City residents work, the top places are Tampa, Plant City, Lakeland, Brandon, and Eastlake. And then when we look at where Plant City workers live, the top places are Plant City, Lakeland, Brandon, Tampa, and Riverview. We also looked a little further into commute patterns and the zero-car households. So we found that 84% of workers in Plant City are driving alone to work. The mean travel time to work is 23.6 minutes. 18% of residents travel less than 10 minutes to work. And 1.5 households in Plant City have no vehicle. And you can see this on the map in our study area. The darker blue areas are have higher percentages of zero-car households. So we're starting to see the areas similar to the communities of concern, which I'll show again on the next slide. So kind of around downtown in the center, where Reynolds and Collins Street intersect, and then over on the west, kind of near where the Strawberry Festival grounds are, near Baker Street and I-4, between I-4 and SR 574. And then again, just to show you the communities of concern map, you can see there's starting to be this overlap of these blue areas that are the lower income, probably more transit dependent populations that are in need of transit service. And then we also looked at Sunshine Line data. So the Sunshine Line is a service provided by Hillsborough County. It provides transportation to people who qualify to get to doctor's appointments, the grocery store, other trips that meet their day-to-day needs. And so we mapped out the top origins and the top destinations, and this is starting to also give us a sense of where the people who are dependent on transit and cannot drive themselves are living. And so the blue dots show the origins. They're mostly senior living facilities, mobile home parks, apartment complexes. And then the destinations are mostly healthcare visits, the hospital, community centers, Walmart, and Winn-Dixie. And I'll pause again to see if there's any other questions at this point.
I'm not seeing any questions or hands raised.
Okay.
Oh, wait, just Jay, yeah, I think Jay has a hand raised again.
Hi, sorry for the again. My original wasn't intentional. I am interested, though, that your presentation thus far has really focused on communities of need. In what work I've done to try and learn as much as I can about transit, it seems like a lot of the push and pull of transit is ridership versus coverage. Ridership being something more that works economically, coverage being more of a everything to everyone. And I worry that in our community we might get too focused on serving particular people instead of figuring out what might actually be viable long term. And so I'm interested to see how you think those two counterparts kind of balance.
Sure, and I think we get into that some with the alternatives. We do have the past ridership numbers from the previous service. That does kind of align with where those communities of need are. Also, it was a comment that we heard quite a few times, and from the written feedback we got at the first focus group meeting, that those were the people that probably needed it the most. I know we've heard a comment that the grocery stores are now kind of on the outskirts of town, and so the people who might not have access to a vehicle in the core of Plant City, we're not sure how they're actually getting to the grocery store right now. So that's just some of the feedback that we got, but we'll also look at, we have some cost analysis that we can show in the next couple slides.
Yeah, I think that's all for now.
Okay.
Can we move on to the next section?
Yep, I'm trying to. All right. So to start off with, we are going to talk about the circulator within Plant City. And so some of the assumptions that we used were, one, we know that it's about a $600,000 upfront capital cost for each new bus that needs to be purchased. There's also paratransit costs that are associated with any new fixed route service. And so that's estimated at an additional 12% of operating costs. For this service, we assumed an operating time of 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week. And just to note, all of these are planning level cost estimates. Anything that goes forward in the study will require more in-depth analysis by HART staff for more detailed cost estimates. So this is what we have initially come up with. So this is a merge of Route 71 and 72 from the Strawberry Connector service. Both of these saw the highest ridership when it was previously in service. And this connects residential areas with the hospital and medical facilities surrounding it, the downtown, and shopping plazas along Redmond Parkway and South Collins Street. It's about 10.7 miles round trip, and it would have an annual operating cost of roughly $500,000 to $630,000 per year, plus the paratransit costs of about $60,000 to $75,000 per year. It would come every 60 minutes, and the travel time round trip, so if someone were to sit on it for the entire time, it would take just under an hour. It would take about 50 minutes. And the number of people that are living within half a mile of this route is about 9,600. There's 4,000 jobs within a half mile of this route. 18.7% of people in poverty within half a mile. There's a 65.8% minority population living within half mile, and 11% seniors, and then also almost 10% no vehicles. And then the other option that had been discussed through meetings and there was some interest in was this on-demand type service. So this is something that HART currently operates in downtown Tampa. It's called the Downtowner. And what it does is it has about 6 vehicles, electric vehicles out on the road within the downtown service area. And people, it's kind of similar to Uber. They use an app on their phone and say, I'm here and I want to go here within the service area. And within a certain time, the driver comes and picks them up and takes them to that location. So it's about 1.6 million per year to operate in the area size of downtown Tampa. It's funded through a grant that has about a 50% local match. It sees about 14,000 passengers per month. Again, it's because it's in downtown Tampa. It's a higher density area. The cost per passenger for HART is about $5. And right now, on average, the wait times are about 15 minutes. They, in the beginning, saw a lot higher average wait times, and what they've done now is kind of join rides up. So they see if someone's requested a ride and they're near another person who's requested a ride, they'll kind of pick those 2 people up and make the trips and wait times a little shorter. And just to show you for comparison the service area, so this is generally the surface area that the Downtowner operates in downtown Tampa. And then similar, this is overlaid Plant City, the same exact area to scale what that area would cover in Plant City. So just for reference, because we're not comparing apples to apples here. There is obviously Plant City is a little less dense than downtown Tampa, so there's some considerations. But this was an option that had been discussed, and we wanted to share it and get people's thoughts on it too. And then getting into the other transit options as far as connecting Plant City to Tampa and Lakeland. Similar assumptions here, $600,000 for capital cost for a new bus, paratransit costs at additional 12% of operating cost. And it would operate Monday through Friday for peak service, 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. and then in the evening, 3:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And so we first looked at the previous route that was in service, Route 28. And so again, this was a park and ride type of service. People were picked up off of the Nodasassa Road and then kind of jogged down through Brandon, over to the expressway and onto downtown Tampa. And so this service, roughly speaking, with those operating times would be about $200,000 to $250,000 per year, plus the paratransit costs to operate. It'd come every 90 minutes. Travel time one way would be about 45 minutes, which obviously can fluctuate depending on traffic, but generally it'd be about 45 minutes. And then our second option we looked at was traveling along I-4 between Plant City and Lakeland and downtown Tampa. And so this would connect downtown through the Net Park transfer facility to Plant City. It would come down, actually go through downtown, do a little jog down to the Amazon Distribution Center, and then over to Lakeland. And for those commuters from Plant City trying to get into downtown or other places in Tampa, they can connect to Net Park and connect on to USF, the airport from there, or they can stay on and keep riding it on into downtown Tampa. So the costs here, again, with those Monday through Friday, morning and evening service hours, it would be about $400,000 to $450,000 per year operating cost, plus the paratransit costs of $48,000 to $54,000. It would also come every 90 minutes, and travel time one way would be about 55 minutes.
Hey, Alana.
Yes.
This is Nicole. I just wanted to say that for the express routes, we don't need to add paratransit.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good to know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. And so a third option we looked at was connecting Plant City and Lakeland through to Tampa through the Mango area. There's a Walmart stop there already. And this would also connect by 50th Street, which has a couple stops available connecting to a few other routes there too. And this would also have a similar operating cost annually, about $400,000 to $450,000. Come every 90 minutes. Travel time one way would be about 50 minutes. And then lastly, this is a fourth option that could be looked at. So there's already an existing Route 38, which connects between the Net Park transfer facility and the Mango Walmart. So what could be done here is creating an extension of that to connect on to Plant City, whether that be extending the existing Route 38 or could also just be a completely new route that would operate back and forth. With that option, there would be then 2 transfers to get to downtown Tampa. And if it was an extension of Route 38, then it would just be one. So people could get off at Net Park and they could go on to downtown if that's their destination, or the airport, or USF, or anywhere else pretty much within HART's operating service. So the cost for this one would be about $250,000 to $300,000 per year. Frequency would be every 60 minutes, and then the travel time one way from Plant City to Net Park would be about 50 minutes. So just for comparison overall, amongst all of the limited stop routes, just so you can see, there's, none of them stand out as like the shining, aha, this is perfect, because there's always drawbacks, whether one's a little more costly, but it's a little quicker, or one's a little cheaper, but might take a little longer, or might have a couple of transfers that need to happen. So these are some of the things that we're weighing and want to get your feedback on. So now I will pause and open it up to any questions, comments, discussion.
There are a few questions. We have Rodney Wetzel that is asking, why not go with cutaways to start? We have Charles Barmby that's asking that per trip cost, it is one way or round trip, thanks. Jay Hollenkamp is asking 60 to 90 minute headways is a non-started for most people. Are there any options with the 10 to 20 minute headways? I recognize this will be very scaled back coverage area.
Okay, can we start with the first one? That was, why not look at cutaways?
Mm-hmm.
That is something that we can definitely explore, and I'd love to talk to you further about that option.
The next one would be the per trip cost. Is it one way or round trip?
That would be round trip. That would be operating it annually round trip. Or the per trip cost. Yes, so that's the same. It's round trip.
Okay. Then it asks 60 to 90-minute headways is a non-started for most people. Are there any options with a 10 to 20-minute headway?
For that would be for the Circulator route?
No, I think it came for the express route.
I think that
there was any
would,
can we look at a 10 to 20-minute headways?
I mean, we can certainly look at that. I think the costs would be fairly high on that though. So that's one consideration, but we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, and it was for any of the routes.
Yeah, Jay, I think you're self-muted. So if you have any question, I think you can unmute yourself and clarify that.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I didn't realize that. I'm still learning this GoToWebinar software. From what I've read, and so my concern is that if you have 60 to 90-minute headways, which is what it appeared to be with all of the options that you presented, what you're limiting yourself to is, I believe, riders who are strictly dependent on transit. Anybody with a car is not going to take transit that's 60 to 90-minute headways in most instances. And so I think what you're doing by that option is creating a system that in its first iteration is strictly welfare. And that it's not that there's anything wrong with that. My concern though is that we had a bus system in the past that didn't last. And the reason why it didn't last, as I understand, is that the financial obligations were a little bit too great. My concern is that if we start with a reintroduction of a system that has similar obligations, it too will face a similar fate. And so for me, I would be more interested in what could be successful long-term, even if that is a diminished service, than something that at the outset has a high chance of, or a significantly higher chance of failure.
Mm-hmm. And so with any of these routes, we can certainly play with the numbers, see, what the costs are when you start. I mean, to get the frequency down to the 10 to 20-minute headways, you would have to add a lot of vehicles on. So that's the cost consideration that you have to.
I think that depends.
To add in.
One of the things that we discussed at the first meeting was a bus that strictly went back and forth between downtown Plant City and downtown Lakeland. And that's a 20-minute drive at any time of the day. Therefore, if you had one bus in Plant City and one bus in Lakeland and they alternated, with two buses, you could cover that. And when you go from that, maybe as just a weekend service to get started or something that provides a lot of utility to many people, you might create something that has a viability that you can build on. My concern is that when your first step is 7 days a week in a large coverage area that has headways, you're essentially having a trade-off between coverage area and frequency. And if you have two stops, Lakeland and downtown Plant City, and two buses, and not 7 days a week, but a more limited time frame, it's not that you're not aspiring to be much more, but you're maybe presenting yourself in a context that has a higher likelihood of succeeding and can appeal to everybody as opposed to a very limited subset of the population. Ultimately, I agree that transit is most appealing to the dependent portion of the population, but I think trying to be everything to that population at the outset, which is what these options kind of come off as for me, is something that will ultimately not help them because it'll be less likely to be something that will succeed long term.
Okay, definitely some good thoughts there and things we can take into consideration too. I think I liked your idea that you were mentioning of just the Plant City to Lakeland option and kind of the baby steps to a bigger service. So we can definitely look at all of that and before we bring anything to the public open house.
Alana, there's another question. What are cutaways? So I think that was asked by Christopher Gleason. And
sure. Is that, Nicole, is that something you can help answer a little better than me? Nicole, you're muted if you're talking.
Hey, sure. So when we're talking about cutaways, we're looking at different areas where the bus can pull into, pull out of, that will shorten our time or make other pit stops as I know it.
Hey, this is Rich. I think what the question or the suggestion was applied to the type of vehicle, and from my vast experience running transit systems, I'm kidding, but I think it's a smaller vehicle, basically built on a truck chassis, kind of like what was shown earlier for the Strawberry Express type of vehicle.
Yes.
And I think I just read from Google also, it's a kind of a vehicle which is alternatively designed. So it's a smaller truck.
And that, yes, that's what was used previously for the Strawberry connector. But yeah, what Nicole said was what I was thinking of with cutaway. So I guess for the original question, we just want to clarify which cutaway you were referring to.
Let me see who asked that question. It was Rodney who asked. Let me unmute Rodney.
Rodney.
No, Rodney is unmuted. Yeah. Hey, Rodney.
Yes, I am talking about the smaller vehicle. For example, the RBOC on the TRIPS contract is now going for about 360, which is a lot cheaper than the bigger buses, but it's also a matter of perception. Because when you put on a big bus, you're starting a new route and you're going to build ridership, the public sees a big bus with a few people. You start out with the RBOC, and as that bus meets capacity, then you move up to a larger vehicle. It's better perception for the public, and it saves you on initial costs.
Okay.
Thank you. That's good clarification.
There's another question asked by Richard Lilliquist, which was data generated was based upon a half-mile distance. Why is this a half-mile distance? This seems to be a long distance for many to walk, and I suspect that it's a standard used to develop transit feasibility study. However, it's not realistic to think people will walk this far for transit service.
Yeah, I mean, we can do quarter mile, but half mile is generally the area that you typically look in with transit, because some people are not just walking, they're biking to their bus stop too.
And we have a couple more questions. Was the study started under the assumption that the 1% surtax would be in place? There was a question brought up by Gleason.
It would be taking that into account, but this was started while it was all kind of up in the air anyway. But and I don't know if the MPO wants to add anything to that. Vishaka, if you want to add anything.
I think I would defer this question to Rich. Or
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, Rich. There was a question from one of the gentlemen, Christopher Gleason, who asked, was the study conducted under the assumption that 1% surtax would be in place?
This is Sarah here.
Yes,
The study will look at the possible portion based on population that HART would receive and utilize that to see how much that revenue that would generate, and then use that as part of a funding strategy. But it's not completely tied to the surtax.
Do we have other questions?
No, Sarah. Do you have any other questions, Sarah? I mean,
I'm not seeing the questions that you guys are getting, so I'm not sure.
Me either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I can't see any of them.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't have any question. Sorry.
This is Nicole. I actually have a question for the group. I know Jay talked about something, travel from Plant City to Lakeland as one option specifically. So would you be thinking about if we did maybe Tampa to Plant City and then Plant City to Lakeland as two separate transportation routes?
This is Rich. That thought occurred to me too, and may make sense as an alternative or something to look at. The trade-off, of course, being if somebody's traveling from Lakeland to Tampa or vice versa, it would require them to transfer.
My feeling on that is, one, the important distinction between Tampa to Plant City and Plant City to Lakeland is that the travel time between Plant City and Lakeland is consistent at all times of the day. The travel time between Tampa and Plant City is not. Therefore, the needs for busing will very much depend on the time of the day. If we're talking about baby steps, which I think I commented is something that I really like, I like the idea of Plant City to Lakeland because it seems like a very small first step that is much more predictable. I think the idea of Tampa to Plant City is a fantastic idea, but one that hasn't yet reached its point of viability. There's a lot happening in transit right now. A lot depends on the surtax. But right now, Tampa to Plant City is so difficult, depending on the time of day, that I have a tough time imagining what a successful transit system would even look like that would provide that sort of service. When I think about Plant City to Lakeland, I can imagine it because it's a consistent 20-minute trip.
All right. I don't have any questions. I just have some, let me see. Yes, it's a smaller vehicle by Rodney. We can use them for fixed routes. Remember, you can connect with Citrus at County Line. Yes, Rodney, that was one of the possibilities that we are looking at, connection with the Citrus connection. The other questions I have is Jay. I think you already addressed this. Tampa to Plant City has travel times that vary depending on the time of the day. We've already discussed that. And Charles has a question or a comment that makes sense. A Plant City Lakeland route will be needed via I-4. I see a lot of popularity here for the Plant City Lakeland route and the Citrus connection. Anybody else has any comments? I see Richard has a raised hand. I don't know if it's from before. Richard, I think Mr. Lilliquist, you could probably ask the question. I think you're unmuted. So if you have any question, can you go ahead and ask?
Richard hasn't entered his audio pin, so he can't unmute himself until he enters his audio pin.
So do I see I mean, it's not a raised hand, right? It's a question, Lionel, I'm trying to address. If there's is there a way we can address this question?
Oh, yes, for Jay's question, yes, he can be.
No, not Jay, Richard Lilyquist. I see a question mark, but I don't know if there's a way we can connect to him. Yes.
He'll have to type it in because we don't have his audio pin.
And he typed his question. It has been answered. Thank you. So I don't think he has any question. And I'm sorry again for handling this chat, but I think once you raise the hand or once the question is there, it's still showing us they have a question. So I don't know if that's why I'm getting confused. Christopher Gleason also, I think that has been addressed. Jay Hollenkamp, Rodney Wetzel, they have all been addressed, I guess. So unless there's any new questions. Here.
They should be, the question should clear out. It just might take some time to refresh.
I had an additional thought, if you don't mind. One of the prior commenters mentioned the cutaway, and his focus, if I understood him correctly, the focus of his comment was the idea of using vans to build up to buses more as a gateway. And one of the additional factors there is that my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the cost of a driver of a van is actually cheaper than the cost, because the training is less than the drivers for a city bus. And so if we're thinking about baby steps in any of these options, one way to get started, particularly with a public that's going to be skeptical from the start, is to start with something potentially like vans and lower cost drivers, since labor is the predominant cost in this. If we start with vans and a lower cost driver, we might have the opportunity to grow. And in the event of failure, in the event, I shouldn't say failure, but in the event that it doesn't work out, we're maybe in a better position to pivot and try something friendly.
Okay. Jay, while you are still on the line, as far as like an internal circulator goes, what were your thoughts on the places where it needed to go?
So my thoughts were kind of start with some fundamentals, which is that transfers are not bad. Transfers are a good thing if you have the right headways, which is why I think headways are so important. But if you can get to 10 to 20 minute headways, the reason why transfers are good is because you can have some fixed routes that provide people accessibility to multiple different variations as opposed to one kind of single option. And if you embrace that, if you embrace the idea of 10 to 20 minute headways and valuing transfers, I think the appropriate route creates a box around downtown Plant City that would be the Reynolds-Baker corridor, the Park corridor, the Alexander corridor, and then on the south side, there's not as clear of a corridor, but something that connects Park to Alexander. You've essentially created a square. And the interesting thing about that square is it's about a half mile wide at any point, which means if you create two more routes in between to create a cross in the middle of that square, you will have covered every area within that. Everybody will be within a quarter-mile walking distance.
Okay.
And I think with that quarter mile, you create something that's long-term viable. I should add, I look at this less as something that we can do right now. I look at this as a plan that's ultimately going to go before the public in a time that's in the future. Plant City is growing greatly. I don't think we're there right now. I don't think we're ready for that, but I do think it's the time to start planning for it. And so when I speak of those sorts of routes, I'm thinking of us in 10 years where we're going to be. And I think we're going to be densely packed enough within that square to justify all of those routes.
Okay.
I just want to clarify, this is Rod. What I'm not talking about vans, I'm talking about cutaways. And cutaways hold, it depends on the size of the cutaway. There's different kind of buses. There's a city bus, what we refer to as a city bus, where the engine's in the rear. And then there's a cutaway where the engine's in the front. If you're talking about the cost of labor for a driver, it depends. When you say that it's cheaper for a van driver, that's not necessarily true. It depends on, number one, the size of the vehicle. If that bus is under so many seats, you don't have to have a CDL. If it's over so many seats, then yes, you do have to have a CDL driver. But most transit agencies pay for that driver's CDL, and most transit agencies, whether you're driving a van or a bus, it doesn't mean they're going to pay you differently. And I just wanted to clarify that so that he has an understanding of what I was talking about. But you definitely want to go with a cutaway and not a van for one, accessibility, because anything you put on the street is going to have to be ADA compliant. You're going to have a lift. Yeah, you can get a van with a wheelchair, but if you put a van in a wheelchair, you have no room for anybody else. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying. And I brought up the photo of, this was the previous strawberry connector.
Yes,
so
that's a cutaway.
About. Yeah, so it has the ability to have this wheelchair lift in it.
One of the things we also need to think about is how the public perceives a cutaway versus an actual bus, and if they are willing to use that as their transportation.
I wanted to add that in addition to the time predictability of Plant City to Lakeland, that I think it was Jay that mentioned, I imagine that route being commonly used for recreational purposes of a day or a night out of someone from Plant City or Lakeland going to the other town. And that said, I would imagine that destination being the core downtown of each area. So to me, it seems like a simpler approach, and I know that becomes more complicated with the challenges of trying to address a larger area with, versus something that's a little bit more dense. And I looking earlier at the different options or different goals of these routes, maybe recreation isn't the ideal, but I could see a high percentage of ridership to and from that destination. Maybe not the people that need it most in terms of income, but if we're trying to get momentum of just people using public transit, I could see that route being a good starting place.
Okay. And who is that speaking, just to clarify?
Harley Smood in Plant City.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Good comment. Thank you. Well, that's definitely something that we can look into and evaluate. It sounds like there's a lot of interest there.
Yeah. Arlie's question was already addressed here. Thank you, Arlie. And that's
any other comments or questions? Anyone else want to share just what their kind of ideal system would be?
We do have a comment from Rich Clarendon. He just said that one of the other things to note about the cutaways is that they're generally less rugged and have a shorter lifespan.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like that those were all the questions and comments. But again, we're going to be sending out a survey after this. So this was not your one and only chance to provide us your ideas of what is kind of ideal for you, or any comments, things you'd like to see changed in what we went through today. So just to remind you again, our schedule. So we'll hopefully have a public open house tentatively we're planning for July. Obviously, if it's in person, all depends on the state of the world, but that's what we're shooting for, is an in-person public open house in July. We're leading into that. We will take all the feedback we got today and on the survey from you guys, make some updates to what we're proposing, and then have that shown at the public open house. And then feedback we get from that we'll incorporate and summarize everything into a final report that will then be shared with the HART board and the MPO board, and take it from there. So just again, this is our website, so you can download this presentation there, materials from our first focus group meeting, that existing conditions report, and then we'll also be sending out that follow-up survey to everyone who came to the meeting today. And then if you have any other questions, we have Vishaka and Nicole's contact info below. There's no last comments from Vishaka or Nicole or anyone else on the line. I think.
I do want to say, I'm sorry, this is Rod again.
Yeah.
But the RBOC buses are actually considered medium duty. And yes, they do have a shorter lifespan, but you're looking at a cheaper cost. But the beauty of getting that for a starter project is, number one, appearances. Because the bus isn't a huge bus with a few people in it, but also you can transition that to other needs such as paratransit and or emergency response contingency fleet once you have built up that capacity for the big bus. Okay, thank you.
What was the name of the bus again, Rod? I didn't hear that name. I know you had a.
If you get an RBOC bus, what's nice about the RBOCs is they have a ramp instead of a lift. Okay. So the driver doesn't have to get out and manual or do the lift. They stay in the bus, they deploy the ramp, and people just come up on the bus, and then they secure them instead of actually have to use the lift.
Okay, that's good.
Hey, this is Rich Clarendon. I had one other thought before we conclude, and it maybe we may be running short of time really to discuss fully, but I just wanted to put it on the table. And again, I'm not sure how this fits into the scope of the study, but I think it's worth noting that, for example, if HART were contracted or, engaged to run this service, their operating base is quite a ways away from Plant City. So it would require a lot of deadhead miles just to start the service every day. And I'm wondering if somehow it could be noted or looked at, the possibility of stationing or out parking buses in Plant City somewhere so they could begin and end the route there instead of having to go back into Tampa every day. Just a thought.
Hey, Rich, this is Nicole from HART. We have actually started talking about deadhead and how that's going to impact the cost and the travel routes here. So we haven't thought about looking at areas that we could possibly use in Plant City, but that is definitely a good point.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that that could add to the cost considerably or save dollars depending on how it's managed.
So for the cutaways, am I understanding here that you could use them for another purpose at the times when they are not running? So you can use the same bus for different alternatives?
I think that's what Rob was saying. It could be used for paratransit trips as well, if needed.
Yeah. All right. I don't see any questions. Do we have any other comments from any of the project management people?
Nope.
All right. Thank you, Alana. I think we did a good job with trying to host the meeting virtually, and I do thank everyone who has attended today, and thanks for your time. I appreciate your comments and suggestions, and also for your time. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. So I think we are running, time-wise, we are good with today. And as Alana said, I would like to wind up by saying that we will send you the PowerPoints and the survey. And this meeting will also be available. If you have any questions, you could contact Nicole or I, or anyone will address any of your questions. And we look forward to seeing you, your support continue with us. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.